Welcome back, Sebastian here. So today I'm back with another video, and with Red Bull getting another win at the Canadian Grand Prix last weekend, it really got me thinking about Mercedes' eight straight wins to start the 2019 Formula One season, and that kind of led to this madness that you see on the board here. So I kind of wanted to go through looking at dominant Formula One seasons by constructors and looking at the start of the season they had, the first 8 races of those seasons, and seeing how this year's Red Bull stacks up to those historically great years. So starting all the way back in 1952, we have Ferrari, who had in the first 8 races, of course there was only 8 races that season, they had 7 wins, 7 poles, and 17 podiums. Now, how did they get 17 podiums when there's only 16 podiums they could get? Well, back in that day, teams actually could have 3 cars, so there were quite a few podiums that year where Ferrari locked out first, second, and third on the podium. Of course, that year, so the reason they didn't get their 1 win and 1 pole was because, of course, back in those days, the Indianapolis 500 was part of the Formula One Championship. So that they competed, Alberto Ascari competed, but they DNF'd and they did not get pole. So, of course, only 7 wins and 7 poles from the remaining 7 races. So, really fantastic season. Next, I'm looking at the qualifying and the race gap. So I basically calculated the average gap in qualifying that they had over their opposition. Of course, if another team had pole or won the race, then that would be subtracted from their total and averaged out. So in qualifying, it was on average 7.2 seconds advantage for Ferrari. So absolutely astronomical by today's standards. The race gap was quite a bit worse. 4 minutes and 22 seconds on average they won by that year. And there was quite a few races where they actually won by over a lap. So I couldn't find any records of the exact time. So I basically just used the fastest lap from the race as like a bare minimum to calculate their gap. Next we go to 1988, which is McLaren, of course, the very famous MP44. They got all 8 wins in the first 8 races, and of course they only lost 1 race that year, the Italian Grand Prix, which was won by Gerhard Berger and Ferrari. They got 7 poles, so they didn't get one of the pole positions, 13 podiums, and their average qualifying gap was 1.167 seconds. So not quite as big as the Ferrari in 1952, but still absolutely massive by today's standards. In the race, very dominant as well, 52.94 second advantage on average in the race. Next, going 4 years later to 1992, and this is Williams, one of Williams' best ever cars. First 8 races, they had 6 wins, 7 poles, and 13 podiums. Quality gap was very similar to the McLaren, 1.061 seconds. And the race pace a little bit less as well, 40.014 second gap for race gap from the first to the next best team in the race. Next, we jump all the way to 2002 with the Ferrari, and that was 6 wins, 5 pole positions, the lowest on the board, surprisingly, and 11 podiums as well, which is second lowest on the board. So of course the 5 pole positions might be a bit surprising, but the Williams BMW was extremely strong in qualifying that year, and Montoya was able to get quite a few pole positions as well. Qualifying gap was actually the lowest on the board, 0.185 seconds, because of that very strong Williams. The race was only 3.827 seconds. However, there was this is including Schumacher's race at the Malaysian Grand Prix that year, where he basically finished a minute off the lead, carrying damage from a collision on the opening lap, I believe. And if you remove that race, the gap increases to 13 seconds, which is very close to the 2019 Mercedes. Next, 2016, first of 2 Mercedes on the board. The Mercedes from 2016, one of their more dominant cars. They got 7 wins and 7 pole positions from the first 8 races. Of course, the one race they didn't win was the infamous 2016 Spanish Grand Prix, won by Max Verstappen. Their 1 pole was the 2016 Monaco Grand Prix, which was, of course, Daniel Ricciardo as well. Quality gap was pretty big, though quite big by modern standards. 0.503 seconds gap to the next fastest team on average. race was also pretty big, the 16.951. So quite a large gap in the race. Next, we go to 2019 Mercedes, which was basically the inspiration for making this video. 8 straight wins in the first 8 races, 6 pole positions, 15 podiums, the highest on the board excluding the Ferrari in 1952. Quality was 0.346, so quite a bit less than their 3 years earlier from Mercedes, but still higher than the Ferrari, but quite a bit below the McLaren and Williams from the 80s and 90s. Let's see, then in the race, 10.86 seconds, so one of the lower ones on the board, but still pretty good. I do remember that year there was quite a few races where there was a safety car very late in the race, which did skew that number. I can remember Bahrain, there was a very late safety car because of the double Renault's engine failure. There was a Spanish Grand Prix as well where there was a really late safety car because I believe crash between Norris and Stroll. So those definitely contribute to that number being a bit lower. But I remember that car was absolutely fantastic in the races. Now we get to this year, 2023 Red Bull. 8 wins on the bounce, 7 pole positions. Of course, the one non-pole position was, of course, the Azerbaijan Grand Prix, and 12 podiums, which is actually one of the lower numbers on the board. Then we get to qualifying 0.331 seconds, which is lower than the 2019 Mercedes, and much lower than the 2016 Mercedes, and just a little bit higher than the 2002 Ferrari. So I think that kind of lines up with what we already knew. This year's Red Bull is pretty good in qualifying, especially in Verstappen's hands, but it's not an exceptionally dominant car. It's nowhere close to the average that I would, if I did the 2020 Mercedes, they'd be much better, probably be ahead in qualifying, as are the 2016 Mercedes by quite a considerable margin. However, the race is kind of what we know the Red Bull is extremely strong at. 21.081 seconds. And I know that includes the Australian race where it was basically a safety car finish. So the cars finished basically nose to tail to finish that race. But almost every race except for the Canadian Grand Prix, the one we just had, it's basically been a 20-second advantage from the first to the next non-Red Bull car. Now, just taking a look at the far right, this kind of mess of numbers and letters that I tried to squish in. These are the top drivers for each of those teams, just so you can get a nice comparison. So going into 1952, we have Ascari, who was first in the championship, won that year with 53.5 points. Half point for shared fastest lap in one of the races. They actually did have a point for fastest lap back then. If you convert that to the 26-point system, so 25 for the win and 1 point for fastest lap, that would be 156 points for Ascari, who of course did not finish the Indy 500. Second in the championship that year, also driving Ferrari, was Nino Farina, who got 27 points that year, and converted to the 26-point system is 92 points. Now going to 1988, Prost was first in the championship after 8 races, 54 points, 158 points in today's system. Senna was second, of course, with 48 points and 138 in today's system. He was, of course, disqualified from the opening race, which is why his points total is quite a bit lower than Prost. Going to 1992, Mansell was first in the championship with 66 points after the first 8 races, which converts to 172 points in today's system, one of the higher numbers on the board. Then we go to Patrese, Riccardo Patrese, who was second in the championship, only 34 points at that point in the season. Let's see if I can read the number. Yes, that's 107 points in today's system. Then getting to 2002, when we get to Ferrari, and we get the only driver on the board where it's not a 1-2 in the championship. And so, of course, that was not Schumacher. Schumacher was first, 70 points, 185 points in today's system. Second highest total, third highest total on the board. And Barrichello had only 16 points after the first 8 races, which even by today's point system, that's only 52 points. He had an absolutely terrible start to the 2002 season, and he was 5th in the championship after the first 8 races. Now moving to 2016, Rosberg led the championship with 141 points, 144 in today's system with the extra point for fastest lap. Hamilton had 117, who had a really tough start, a lot of issues in qualifying, And of course, that crash at the Spanish Grand Prix where both Rosberg and Hamilton were knocked out. So that would go up to 118 in today's system. Then going to 2019, we have Hamilton, Bottas with 187 and 151 points. And of course, they had 5 straight 1-2s to start the year. And of course, Red Bull don't have that because one of their drivers hasn't been able to get on the podium recently. But still, really good total by both Hamilton and Bottas. Now moving into Red Bull, of course, Verstappen first, 195 points. Subtracting the points from the sprint race, it's 189, and from Perez, 126, second in the championship. Obviously, that goes to 118 points. So I think looking at this, Verstappen, even looking at these historically amazing seasons, Verstappen is the highest, 2 points higher than Hamilton in 2019, and 4 points higher than Schumacher in 2002. So still shows how much of an amazing start Verstappen's had and Red Bull has had this year. Of course, reliability is a lot better these days, so you'd expect these totals to be better than the ones from the past as well. And I think also we can use this to look at Perez's season in context as well. Quite a bit lower than Bottas. Bottas actually had a really good start to 2019. I believe he was on the podium every race except for those first 8 races, except for the Canadian Grand Prix. 2016, Hamilton, of course, had his issues, mostly not his fault. And so, of course, for Perez, though, he's doing much better than Barrichello in 2002, and he's doing about the same as Patrese, a little bit better than Patrese in 1992. So I think it was really, in context, though, we can really see that Red Bull's advantage, looking at this as a whole, we can see that Red Bull's advantage is really in the race, and the race pace being better than the 2019 Mercedes by almost double, and being quite a bit better than the 2016 Mercedes, who had that massive engine advantage. You know, we can really see that Red Bull's advantage has been in the race. And I think, you know, I think that the Red Bulls will win every race this year? No, but I think they can. And I do think they do have a big enough advantage in the race where it counts that they could make it work. That being said, I think, you know, qualifying is going to be the one thing that decides on specific tracks if that streak happens. And of course, reliability is going to be a factor as well. So tracks like Singapore, where qualifying is very important, could be one of those places as well. And last year, Red Bull did struggle quite a bit in the sprint weekends because they needed more time to set up their car properly. So the sprint weekends we have coming up, like the Austrian Grand Prix, will be a chance for other teams to get ahead of the Red Bull, and hopefully from the first practice, and hopefully keep that advantage through the weekend. So that's all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. I think just doing a fun look at historically dominant Formula 1 teams and looking at how this year's Red Bull stacks through the first 8 races. And of course, this is something I could look at again after this season to see how Red Bull's done. And, you know, I may choose some different teams and may look at it a bit differently. But again, thank you so much for watching. Which of these teams do you think has been the most dominant, and how do you think this year's Red Bull will stack historically at the end of the year? Please let me know in the comments, and please like and subscribe as well. I know it sounds stupid, but you know, it really helps out the channel as well. Thank you so much for watching, and goodbye.